By default, DLM system tries to configure itself for Title 24 to meet California standards. So, for example, if you have a room controller with one switch leg, a switch, and an occupancy sensor, that load is going to be manual on. So you walk in the room, you'll manually have to cut the lights on. That can be changed to auto on if required. If you have two or more loads, the way it'll work according to Title 24 is you're allowed to have half the lights cut on. But in this case, we just turn on load 1. So load 1 will automatically cut on from the sensor. Load 2 and up will be manual on. Again, those can all be made to be auto on if required. Daylighting, we have two different ones that we use. We use an LMLS 400 that is a closed loop photocell that is seeing natural light and electric light. An LS 500 is an open loop photocell. So think of that as outside, so open outside. It is looking directly outside to see what the light levels are. It does not care about electric light. It doesn't need to see electric light. When installing an LS 500, you take the height of the window, you flip it up, and you go that far away from it, so you're at a 45-degree angle. So it sees out at a 45-degree angle. An LS 400 needs to be between the first light and the window, equidistant, to catch the most light. And the installation instructions, it kind of gives you more information on how to put it in. So by default, in a system like this, we have two loads. We have an LMRC 102. We have an LMDM 101, it's a dimmer switch. We have an LMDC 100, it's a dual technology ceiling mount sensor, so DC. And we have an LMLS 400 closed loop photocell. We're only using one switch leg in the room, so as I said, when you walk in the room, load 1 will automatically cut on. Daylighting will automatically bind itself. If it's a 400, it will automatically bind itself to whatever load 1 is, and it'll work out of the box with its default calibrations and start working if it meets the dimming criteria. So when I walked in, pretty much everything was configured. I went ahead and wiped all the programming. It's called P&G. So the mode, when you power it up, connect everything for the first time, is P&G. It's called plug and go, and that just configures itself. If we want to customize it, then we go into P&L, or push and learn. Those are the modes that you'll use to configure the system. So out of the box, everything was pretty much working fine. Like I said, we did a little bit of fine tuning. Primarily it's just with the photocell. I'll also show you how to test an occupancy sensor to make sure that it has good coverage pattern. And then I can show you how to test a light sensor. Okay. So first off, you want to use your LMCT 100. Power button is on the side. It'll power up. It'll give you hardware and firmware version. When it's powered up, you're going to have your first three options are the one we're going to use, and it's primarily what you will use in most systems. It's sensor configuration, load config, parentheses, P&L, remember push and learn, and daylighting config. So we're going to jump to section 2. So I know there's 2 switch legs in this room, but say we had a second light in here. So we had our regular switch leg, and we were actually, say we had wall washes along the wall, and we wanted those automatically to cut on as well. So I'm going to go to load config, and it's going to tell me to point at any IR device on the network and press select. So there's my select button in the middle. Right here on my sensor is my switch is an IR device. On the occupancy sensor, the little black part is an IR device. And any light sensor, even though there's not a black section, there is an infrared receiver in there. So for the sake of it, I'm going to do it from right here. So I'm going to press select. And it's going to, since I've already programmed it, I've got to get it back into this mode. One more time. May not want me to go in through the light sensor. It's going through the still stuck in the middle. I need to come out. Here we go. You're just going to be fickle, aren't you? There we go. Works better as a switch. So I can see load 1, it's automatically on. You're not going to worry about the blink or LMLS 105. And LMLS 105 is an older light sensor. I've never used them. I don't even know how it works with this, but they have it in there. The load type is a 0 to 10. You can change that to whatever you want it to be essentially, but it's going to default itself to whatever the dimmer type is up in the ceiling. So if I make a change, I'd press send, or for this scenario, I'm going to go next because I'm going to show you how to make load 2 auto on. So I'm going to press select, it's going to come back, and if I had a set of lights tied to this load, those lights would currently be on. So whatever load is displayed in the load config, that light should be on, all the others should be off. So you can easily identify what lights you're currently looking at. So what I want to do is I'm going to make it auto on, so left, right. I'm going to scroll down to send, and point at it, hit select. It's going to ask me, am I finished? If I'm not, then hit select, or I can press home and exit back out. Okay, I'm going to hit select. So the next step is it's called load binding. Since I don't have a second load in the switch, I don't really need this button to turn on or off that load because nothing exists. We're going to ultimately leave it default to where it's controlling both loads, but if you're in a scenario where say I had 4 loads in here and I had a 4-button switch and the customer needed it to bind itself a different way. So I need this button to do this light versus this button doing this light. So using load config, you bounce through your loads, going next and bouncing through the loads. If you'll notice at the switch, the LED is blue. If whatever load you're on, if the LED is blue, it controls that light. If you do not want it to control that light, you push the button. It's stuck in this mode. I'll do it load more so we can actually see. There you go. So when you press the button and the LED is gone, since I'm on load 1, this switch would no longer turn on the lights that are currently on. If I press it again, it will now control those lights. So again, if I had a 4-button switch and I needed to move whatever load 4 is on button 4 to button 1, I'd go to scroll to load 4, hit button 4, press button 1, and it's now assigned to there. Now, with that said, in that scenario, I would also need to move whatever was on button 1 to button 4, or vice versa. So you can move the loads around on a button as needed. Say you have an area where you've got an occupancy sensor, you have multiple loads, but you only want that occupancy sensor to control loads in this area over here on the other side of a partition wall or something like that. There's another option, still within load config, it's bind. If I hit bind, it's going to tell me to point at the desired occupancy sensor and hit select. So if we go over to the occupancy sensor, you can see how the LED is solid blue. Again, just like on the button, if the button LED is blue, there we go. Wonder what was going on. So I'd hit bind, I'd hit select, and now if the LED right there and on the side goes away, it does not control those lights. So it's also good troubleshooting if you've got a set of lights that aren't cutting off with the occupancy sensor. So you can go into this mode and bounce through the loads until you get to that load and see if that little LED turns blue. To add it back, you'll go back to that load, hit bind, point at the sensor again, and voila, it is bound to it. Okay? You can see the LED is solid blue on the light sensor. That cannot be unassigned from this mode. That is done within the daylighting config, which we'll go through next. Okay, so once we're done with that, we'll scroll down to exit. Let me go back into it because I actually got that set. So if I scroll down to exit over here, I can hit exit or select, or I can press home, point at the switch, and there you go. Next thing we want to do is we want to configure the daylighting sensor. So in a standard operation, you want as much light coming in as you can when configuring daylighting. If you're dealing with an LS500, it must see at least 10-foot candles or the calibration will fail every time. If you're doing an LS500, it requires a light meter, as you're going to have to tell it what levels you see. An LS400, like we have on this job, is self-sustaining, auto-calibration. It's going to turn lights on and off, and it's going to do its thing. So we're going to go to daylighting config. We're going to select the model that we're going to use. We're going to use the 400. I can do specific sensor, or I can point at another infrared device and search for sensor, and it'll find the serial number of that, and I can select it. But I'm going to do specific. I'm going to point at it. So the first thing we want to do is zone setup, and it's a dim. I can make it switch, tri-level, or bi-level, I think even tri-level. Okay? So it's going to cut on what load is currently displayed there. It's actually going to flash it so you can identify and see where it is. Again, by default, out of the box, load 1 is always assigned to that daylighting zone. If we go to load 2, by saying next, it's not assigned. So if I wanted it to work off the daylighting, I would assign that zone, and I'd scroll down to next, or to done, and I'll press select, and voila, I've now assigned, just like binding a switch and binding a sensor, I have bound that load as the daylighting zone. Next step is calibration. So calibration, we're going to do auto calibration. We're going to point at it, we're going to hit select. And what it's going to do is, this was designed specifically fluorescence before LEDs became a big thing. We still are currently putting in fluorescent lights, and they're existing. Fluorescents require a little bit more time to warm up, so we give it 2 minutes of the light turning on, and we let the ballast and the lamp actually warm up and come to its full brightness, optimal brightness, in order to do this. If you have LEDs, unfortunately, you still have to sit there and wait for the 2 minutes. With an LS400, once it's done with that 2-minute warm-up, it's going to turn the lights off. It's going to hold them off for a couple of seconds, and then it's going to cut them back on. And it's going to do that for 2 minutes. And what it is doing is it is taking a snapshot 8 feet down from the sensor of what the light level is. And so it's doing it with the lights on, what does it see, and then it's balancing that with what it sees from natural light coming in on the floor. Once it's done with that, it'll set its calibration levels, and you can tweak those and determine, if it's dimming too much, I'll show you which levels you need to raise. If it's not dimming enough, I'll show you which levels to lower. So for now, let's pause it because it's going to flash for 2 minutes.